I had the privilege in May to speak at several mental health events. I had a presentation that I've decided to turn into a podcast series for the month of June. It's called Writing Your Way to Recovery. Now, if you're watching on YouTube, I'm going to use some of the slides so you can see some of that information. I'm sorry if you're on the podcast, I don't have the slides available, but if you email me, I'd be happy to share them. My email is carolyn@carolynScooper.com. Hi, this is Carolyn Cooper, and welcome to the Mental Health and Faith, a Closer Look podcast and YouTube show. Here we discuss topics around mental health and wellness, mental illness, recovery, and faith, all from a Christian perspective. There will be lots of information on this episode in the show notes, and for more information on me and my ministry, In God's Corner, check out my website. That's www.ingodscorner.org. Hi, this is Carolyn, and I'm finally posting my third and final episode on the Writing Your Way to Recovery series. And this episode is all about how to tell your story. So, a great example we can find is in the Bible. There are lots of great examples in the Bible of people telling their story honestly and with the desire to share their story, not just the good parts, but the unfortunate parts, so they can demonstrate God's work in their lives. And this is what the Apostle Paul is doing in 2 Corinthians. I'm going to read a couple of different excerpts from a pretty long passage where he's talking about his life, just so you can get some an example of how someone can tell their story in a way to make a huge impact, to demonstrate that they have empathy and that they have learned from what they've gone through, and they want others to be inspired and encouraged. So I'll be reading excerpts, and I'm going to start first with 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 26 through 30, and I'll be reading from the New Living Translation. I have traveled on many long journeys, and this is Paul speaking in the first person. I, Paul, have traveled on many long journeys. I have faced danger from rivers and from robbers. I have faced danger from my own people, the Jews, as well as from the Gentiles. I have faced danger in the cities, in the deserts, and on the seas. And I have faced danger from men who claim to be believers, but are not. I have worked hard and long, enduring many sleepless nights. I have been hungry and thirsty and have often gone without food. I have shivered in the cold without enough clothing to keep me warm. Then, besides all this, I have the daily burden of my concern for all the churches, and that is the churches that he helped to start, and actually the others that he visited. Who is weak without my feeling that weakness? Who is led astray, and I do not burn with anger? If I must boast, I would rather boast about the things that show how weak I am. That's kind of an interesting approach, isn't it? So here in this first part of his testimony, Paul is sharing about all of the challenges he's faced, the many challenges, the suffering that he's experienced, the events that have caused him pain and frustration and anger. And he's being very honest in sharing what has happened to him in his role as a missionary, trying to share the gospel, and he's encountered all of these challenges. So the next part that I'm going to read is from 2 Corinthians 12, 5 through 10. And this is where we see he is starting to turn around his story to make a point that others, the people listening, to make a point that the listeners can really grab onto and pay attention to. This is where he really begins to share that encouragement, that inspiration that no matter how much suffering and trials and pain he's been through, it's worth it for him. So 2 Corinthians 12, 5 through 10. That experience is worth boasting about. And I'm going to just quick comment. I've skipped several passages or several verses in here because it's just a fairly long passage. And when he's talking about that experience, between what I previously read and this, he does talk about some of the positive things and the things he could boast about, the successes. He's sharing a few of those. And so when he's saying that experience is worth boasting about, he's not talking initially about the suffering, but you'll see why that's important. 2 Corinthians 12, 5 through 10. That experience is worth boasting about, but I'm not going to do it. I will boast only about my weaknesses. If I wanted to boast, I would be no fool in doing so, because I would be telling the truth. But I won't do it, because I don't want anyone to give me credit beyond what they can see in my life or hear in my message, even though I have received such wonderful revelations from God. So, to keep me from becoming proud, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger from Satan to torment me and keep me from becoming proud. 3 different times I begged the Lord to take it away. Each time he said, "My grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness." So now I am glad to boast about my weaknesses so that the power of Christ can work through me. That's why I take pleasure in my weaknesses and in the insults, hardships, persecutions, and troubles that I suffer for Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong. What a wonderful testimony. A wonderful testimony that Paul is giving. He's acknowledging the pain in his life. And he's acknowledging why, for him, that pain is worth it. Because he knows that he is serving the Lord. He knows that mixed in with the trials is the joy that he has in his salvation, is the rewards that he's building up in heaven. It's a great example of sharing challenging times in your life and turning it into a story that can inspire others, that can encourage others, that can demonstrate that you can empathize with their situation. You know, if someone was with Paul experiencing those same challenges, they know they could go to Paul and talk, to vent a little bit, to share, because he's been there too. And that's why we want to share our stories. We want to share our stories, not to brag about how far we've overcome, not to compare and say, well, my situation was worse than your situation, not to compare or anything like that. We want to share our stories as a way of bringing hope and encouragement and life to others who may be really in a very deep, dark place and have not gone far enough in their recovery to experience the joy they can find, even in the midst of their challenges. So that was the example I wanted to start with. Now let's talk a little bit more specifically about what it means to share your story. There are several ways you can share your story. And first, I want to ask, have any of you had a chance to share your story, maybe just with one other person? Have you ever sat down and shared one-on-one with someone about what is happening in your life? What is going on with you in an honest, vulnerable way? Have you ever done that with one other person? And if you have, is it time to share that story with a little bit bigger group? Not just one person, but maybe a small group that you're in, or a social group that you're in. Now remember, please know, you do not need to share your story with everyone. And you do not need to share every part of your story with anyone. it's up to you to decide what parts are you going to share and what parts are you going to keep just for yourself, and that's okay. And if you're not ready to share your story, that's okay too, because we're really going to talk about writing it here in a minute. But what I'm trying to get the point across here is to say that sharing your story can be very beneficial. And usually you would start with one person, and then when you feel comfortable, share with a small group. And then if you feel moved to do so or called to do so, explore where in a more public place you can share your story. But today, really, I want to focus on the writing of your story, because before you even share with anyone, it can be very beneficial to write it down. So here are some ways that you can share your story. First of all, I am a Respect Institute speaker. Now, that gives me an opportunity to go around to various settings and share my recovery story. It's very specific to sharing your journey of recovery from mental illness or addiction or whatever your hardship was in your life, and demonstrating how living with a mental illness does not mean your life is over. Basically, it's a way to say, I have a full, productive, amazing life while living with a mental illness. That's kind of the core purpose of Respect, is to bring awareness to mental health issues. So, if you'd be ever interested in that, that's maybe something to think about. Now, the reason I'm bringing up that again as a speaking opportunity is because in the Respect speaker training, the whole purpose is to learn to write your story. Many people just read their story when they're sharing. As in the speaking roles that they have, they would actually read the story they've written. So one way to share your story is to just get it down on paper first. Get it down on paper. It's a very freeing experience. Other ways you can share your story. You could write a blog post if you blog, if you want to start blogging. You could do short little posts with different parts of your story at different times, whatever you feel comfortable sharing. Maybe a certain season of the year reminds you of a certain part of your story that you could share. Maybe a birthday or a holiday brings up other parts of your story that you could share at those times. But a blog is a great way to start sharing your story with others. You could write an article. Now, I love writing articles that share parts of my story and demonstrate how God has worked in my life. You could write, check out guideposts, Chicken Soup for the Soul. Those are two big publications or publishers that have lots of opportunities to share your story. So check those out. You could submit your article to other places, other magazines, to a local newspaper, wherever you might find a place to share your story. So write it as an article. You can write a book. Now, you see on this list, I have book and memoir, because I am referring to two separate things here. Sometimes you can use your story to write a book based on the events that you've gone through in your life and what you've learned and what you want to share with others. For example, one of my books is called In This Corner: Battling Trauma and Mental Illness from Inside the Ring. This book that I wrote started as my journals when I was going through my recovery time. And in this book, I share bits and pieces of my story, but my main goal in this book is to help other people who have experienced trauma or PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and who live with a mental illness. And it can be applied to really any situation related to mental health challenges. And I've used my experience in my own recovery journey and the intensive therapy that I went through. I use all of that in this workbook where people can go through and read a little of my story, but mainly more how to address the challenges they are experiencing due to trauma or mental illness. It's a workbook for that reason. Okay? So a book is basically drawing from your experiences in a way that can benefit the readers. A memoir is your actual story. I have my memoir in progress. It's called My 10 Days at the Funny Farm. It's about the 10 days that I spent in a psychiatric facility during that time of intensive training. And just because I'm a writer, I'm a teacher at heart, it also is a workbook, but it does tell a very specific sequence of events of my story of what happened in my life. So it's more of a memoir workbook kind of thing. So those are different places and ways that you can share your experience. But how do you get started? How do you start to write your story so you can begin to think about sharing it with others? I have several steps that I want to point out that I think can help you get started. First, use a past, present, future approach. It is very beneficial when you're sharing your story, just for the sake of sharing your story, to go in a chronological order. That way the people who are listening can follow you chronologically without jumping around and maybe losing track of where you are. So tell about the things in your past that you want to share about. Again, it doesn't have to be everything, just what you want to share about, the events that happened in the past, where you are now in the present, and what your hopes and plans and goals are for the future. Use that sequence, that chronological sequence, when you're writing out your story. And then, I've already said this several times, and I guess I have it as a point here too, decide what to share and what not to share. When you're writing things out, include everything. All right? When you're writing your story, the past, present, future approach, write out everything. This is just for you. This is to help you get in touch with the things that have happened in your life. Only after you've just written it all out, then you can go back through, maybe rewrite it in a different place, and only include the things that you are comfortable sharing or ready to share. Be vulnerable, but in a healthy way. And what I mean by that is this. Sharing your story really should only be done when you have worked through your issues, at least most of them, and are in a place you can share your story somewhat more objectively. This is what happened in my life. You don't want to share in a way that shows that you really haven't dealt with it. You don't want to say things like, this happened to me and I will never get over it, but I'm trying. Something like that. That may not be a great example, but you want to demonstrate in your story that you have worked through your issues and you're ready to share about it. And then be respectful of others. That's in a way kind of goes with the one I just shared, but when you're telling your story, remember it is about you and your story and how you have adjusted and healed and recovered and how you are looking forward to the future with hope and joy, how you are presently experiencing a purpose in your life because of what you've worked through and what you look forward to. It's your story. It's about you and the events in your life. It's not an opportunity to say, it was all my mom's fault. It was all my dad's fault. It was all my abuser's fault. There are people in our lives that hurt us, that contribute to our trauma and our pain. But this, sharing your story, is not your opportunity to place blame on other people or to accuse people publicly. This isn't the forum for that. This is to demonstrate, yes, I went through this, but wow, look where I am now. So be respectful of others in your story, even if they don't deserve that respect, okay? I'm not saying they deserve it necessarily, but from your perspective, keep the story about yourself, not about others in a hurtful way. And then finally, share your successes. Again, that's one of the purposes of doing this, is to share in a way that demonstrates there is hope in this world. Encourage other people with your transformation. Share the victories you've experienced throughout your journey. Share the ups and the downs. Sharing your story is a beautiful opportunity to give back. It's a beautiful opportunity to demonstrate that there is hope, there is joy, there is peace. All this you can have in the midst of whatever you're facing in life. And I believe that's because of the work Jesus Christ did for us. It is in Him that we can find that peace and joy and hope. It's through the power of the Holy Spirit that we can be transformed and restored, renewed, revived. God has made a way for us to live in this broken world. And that is with His help, with His guidance, and sharing that story with others is just a beautiful experience. So thank you so much for listening today. I want to share that I am going to be taking off the months of July and August this summer. I will be reposting some old episodes from 5 years or so ago when I had a podcast as part of a nonprofit I had founded. That nonprofit disappeared. It died during COVID, but that's okay. I'm just going to repost some of those old episodes in July and August, and I will be back with some amazing guests in September. Thank you so much. God bless your day. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and don't forget there's even more information in the show notes. You'll want to check those out. Now please join the conversation on mental health and faith. Leave your comments or send me an email with your thoughts, questions, or suggestions. I really look forward to hearing from you. May God bless your journey.